Okay, been given the go ahead, so I think we are live. Hi everyone, and welcome to our first men's room. Today we're going to be talking about men's physical and mental health. Tim and I are your hosts at NRAS, and we're joined by Richard, Isaac, and Caroline. Welcome to you all. Would each of you like to give us a quick intro? And Caroline, if I could start with you, please.
Yep, sure. Hi, I'm Caroline Fleury. I'm Associate Professor of Men's Health and Long-Term Conditions at the University of the West of England in Bristol.
Thanks, Caroline. Richard.
Hi, I'm Richard Boucher. I'm a trustee of NRAS, and I was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis about 8 years ago.
Thank you, Richard. And Isaac?
Hi, I'm Isaac. I was diagnosed with JIA at the age of 11, and since then I've started my business, which is focused on helping young people with arthritis re-engage with exercise or get back into exercise for the first time.
Thank you. And thank you for giving up your time and joining us today. So for our audience's benefit, you're watching an open panel event where we're going to ask the hosts some prepared questions. The first half of this NRAS Live is related to men's health. The second half is going to switch it up to men and inflammatory arthritis. So let's start with our first question open to the floor. It won't come as a shock that men really struggle to be open about their health, hence why we're doing this tonight. What advice could you give to break down these health barriers? Anyone want to kick off with that one?
So, yeah, I'll chip in on this one if you don't mind. So obviously there's a massive stigma around men's mental health, which leaves a lot of guys feeling ostracized and that they're unable to express their emotions or how they're truly feeling. So I think it's really important to seek help from your friends group or your family, and really lean on those that you can trust to be super open with. And yeah, just trying to promote a bit more openness and create a bit more of a culture of sharing and being vulnerable with other people as well. But obviously it's super hard when there's a lot of stigma around men's mental health and the whole thing of, you've got to man up and just kind of battle through things, which is obviously totally counterproductive. So yeah, I think lean on others that you trust and seek advice from other men in your group who you feel are on the same level as you. I think that's definitely a beneficial way to go about things.
Okay,
thank you, Isaac.
Jump in as well?
Yeah, of course, please do, yeah. Don't stand on ceremony, so.
Great advice there from Isaac. There's a sort of old, there's a kind of saying around supporting men to talk that women will support each other face to face and men support each other shoulder to shoulder. And Isaac may see some of that in his teamwork with the coaching. We see men working together a lot. So one sort of that you might have heard of a very successful way, a kind of organisation that get men talking is Men's Sheds, and they provide physical spaces. It was originally set up to tackle loneliness in older men, but they provide physical spaces for men to work in almost garden shed type activities. And by doing this sort of shoulder to shoulder work, the focus isn't talking, but by doing that, they talk. And it's a kind of excellent model, that idea of, give men a shared purpose. And the byproduct of that will be that they talk to each other. And I think we often do quite a lot of focusing on how do we get men to talk to each other, rather than give them the right setting and the right environment. And men naturally will talk to each other. But if you stick them in a room and tell them to talk to each other, then you're probably setting yourself up to fail.
And I'll probably support that, because I do a bit of cycling, and I was on one ride a few years ago where it turned out of 9 of us, 4 of us had autoimmune conditions, but it was by the fact you were side by side cycling, not looking at each other. So I would probably say, Stuart, in answer to your question, is sometimes creating that opportunity, whether it's a walk, so, walking side by side, or, doing an activity of some form, probably is a way in which, and I think sometimes just breaking down. So I would say on a cycle ride, look, you might have to look after me. because I'm a bit like the Duracell bunny. I'm not that bunny anymore. I'm the one at the back who dies after about half an hour. So you might need to look after me. And then it opens up a bit of a discussion as to why, because I go, well, I've got rheumatoid arthritis, and they, oh, well, I've got a bit of arthritis. But you then start to get into the debate of what it really means.
That makes sense. So I'm guessing what was that initial thing that gave you the confidence, Isaac, to openly talk about your health issues?
I think, honestly, it was the fact that my friends were so caring of me, which was quite rare. Obviously, this was about 10 years ago now, but they were just really open, and yeah, they kind of confided in me a lot as well. I found that I was the person that people would come to kind of share their problems with. So I feel like we kind of built this natural rapport organically. So I don't think it was a case of kind of building up trust for me personally. It might be for other people, but I feel like it was always there in a sense. So it was really comforting knowing that I could confide in others around me, and that people were backing me and supporting me and providing sort of care and a shoulder to lean on and someone to talk to in that sense when I was really going through it. So yeah, I think that was super amazing, but quite unique as well, I will say, I think, for guys to be kind of that open when we were, I don't know, 15, 16. So yeah, it was a super special kind of blessing in a way.
Especially at that age, being at school as well. That's quite interesting, because back in the day when I was at school, you know, any sort of subtle differences may get you pulled out as a pariah in your group. So
yeah, for sure. Absolutely. And I think there's a lot to be said about that kind of shoulder to shoulder confiding in one another. Like, we would have lunch together at the dinner table, and then a couple of my mates would go off for a walk just around school or outside, that kind of thing, and just have a chat and just kind of really get into it, where people weren't necessarily prying or we could be discriminated against for that. So yeah, that was kind of like our forum and our way of talking to each other on a level, basically.
So I'm going to jump in with a quick question, if that's okay. So I suppose this is one more for Isaac and Richard. You know, when you were first diagnosed, who was the first man you turned to talk about your diagnosis, and how did it go?
Mine was a consultant. But then it was partly having a frank discussion, because the problem was I'd used Dr. Internet and had come down to it was possibly one of two things. So when I was diagnosed, his comment was, "You don't seem that surprised." But then we talked about what it meant, because I'd looked at some of the stats of, you know, people can, you know, give up work quickly. But I think it's partly talking about the mentality and its statistics, and you can always beat the statistics by doing something differently. So did I really know what it was about? Probably not. But I think it was, you know, that initial conversation. But yeah, I didn't know anybody else who had the condition or anything. So I was a little bit on my own for a while on that.
Yeah, 100%. I think I was in a similar boat. So I was 11 when I got diagnosed. So I was a fairly switched on kid, but I don't think I understood the gravity of what this diagnosis meant. So it probably wasn't for a year or two down the line where I was kind of really considering the implications for my life and sort of like how that would look in terms of trying to get to school and, you know, find out the person that I was and become ingrained in certain friendship groups. But there were some really good friends that I had from primary school. Two of my best mates that are still with me, like properly good friends to this day, that I confided in first. And yeah, I think it really strengthened our friendship and our bond as well, being able to open up like that with them. But yeah, initially, as Richard said, just my consultant, basically.
Thank you. Just moving on, Caroline, you know, for myself, you know, I've struggled with mental health issues, and like most men, I think we probably tackle our mental health issues when we're in crisis, but it's probably best to repair the roof when the sun is shining. So just wondering what sort of tools there are out there, what sort of strategies can men use to maintain a positive mental health?
I think there's a lot to be said for almost setting yourself up before things go wrong. So, you know, taking part in group activities, or things where you are building those bonds and friendships, rather than kind of waiting for something to go. It can be really hard to then break into something. But there's an excellent charity based in Bristol, in fact, but Talk Club, who encourage men. They have a very upstream approach to encouraging men to talk. So rather than creating talking groups kind of later when something has gone wrong, they have talking groups for men to come along to at any point, so that by the time, well, if something goes wrong, then you've already got the tools and you're already sort of used to talking. And they have a kind of sorry if you can hear my cat in the background, going a bit mad right now. So they use a question, how are you out of 10? And it's a really simple question where you can just put a number on, on your feelings, which is obviously a lot kind of safer and easier than using emotive language. So 0 is, really terrible, and 10 is top of the world. So I think there's something to be said for starting to use that kind of language, so that if one day you're struggling, you can, you're in the habit of saying, if someone says to you, what's your number? And you say a 1, they know what that means. You don't have to say I'm struggling. So almost kind of setting yourself up to be able to talk and to have peer support around you before you get to the point where you might be struggling. And I think, there's something to be said for clinicians building that sort of thing in a lot earlier, so they're not waiting for someone to have to say I'm struggling, but they're commonly asking in clinical appointments, what's your number?
Thank you, Caroline. And Stuart, sorry, I'm going to jump in before you have your chance. Apologies.
Go for it.
Isaac, Richard, is there anything you specifically do to maintain your own positive mental health?
Yeah, 100%. So obviously it goes without saying, mine is exercise. It's been a mainstay since I was 18, so 9 years now. It's just been an incredible kind of outlet to harness all of that frustration and that negativity that I experienced during flare, and then let it all out in the gym when I am in a good space and I'm feeling a lot better in terms of my physical health. And yeah, it's definitely kept me buoyant and afloat in dark times as well, when I have been in flare, but I've still gone despite that, and I've managed to do what I can on the day. And yeah, I think without the gym, I'd definitely be in a lot worse shape now. And it's definitely instilled like a mental resilience as well, 100%. So obviously you have to have a level of resilience when you have arthritis by default, but I think going to the gym and kind of powering through, even when you're not feeling great, you come out and you think, damn, I've really done something today. And it's not always easy and it's not always possible, but when you do make it happen, it's such a great feeling to feel like, even if you got in there and you did sort of 15-20 minutes, a little bit of resistance training or something, just to come away and think, yeah, I've really accomplished something today, despite feeling super low and not feeling great. And it always makes you feel better. No one has ever said, oh, I really regret doing that gym session. It's just not a thing. The amount that it boosts you is incredible. And yeah, obviously, with my business and what I'm trying to instill in other people, I'm a massive, massive advocate for exercising with arthritis.
I'd support. I was very active. I was training for triathlon when I got diagnosed, which I haven't done one since. But I find exercise and doing it with somebody as well. So I still rock climb, and because I have somebody who I go with, we might be thinking, oh, I can't be bothered. It's the motivation that you set, in a way, you've got a mini contract. So we might both be driving home and going, well, go on, I'll go if you go. And so one of us goes, yeah, we're going, and you do it. So I think, I think it's sort of, it would be false to say that we don't have the ups and downs. And there are times when fatigue kicks in and you've got the apathy. But I think it was Chris Boardman, who was a cyclist, who always said when he went training, he would always get on his bike in his kit before he decided not to do it. And I think that type of, it is sometimes the hard bit to get past. I've got a bike in the shed that I try and go in the morning. Do I do it every morning? No. Have I done it for the past few weeks? No. but I know, sometimes you have the lull, but it's not necessary to beat yourself up all the time that you're not doing it, but it's trying to use different things to help motivate you.
That's a good point. And yeah, I think there's quite a few people I know that will obviously do exercise with one of their friends as that motivation to get them out. So at the other end of the spectrum, at the sad end, obviously we've got suicide as being one of the biggest killers in the UK for men. What do we need to do differently as a society to make men feel safe to discuss their mental state?
That's a big question.
It is.
I think from experience is knowing where to go. So I've had, partly through some of the stuff at work where people have read my thing and then rung and said, I'm thinking I'm not in a good state. I'm not qualified to deal with that, but I can find help. And I, quickly found help for them to be able to talk to the right people. So I think it's knowing where to go is part of the challenge of being able to help people get there and get the support that's, in some cases, the professional need that you do need for that.
And I guess that first step is what you just said, Richard, is someone reaching out to you to tell you that they're not feeling right.
Yeah.
So having that conversation.
I think there's it's a very complicated picture. I think men's suicide, and there's lots. There's a lot that I could say on the subject, so I'll try not to go off for the next half hour. I think to start with, it's probably a useful point to bring in that we're currently trying to advocate for a men's health strategy to align with a women's health strategy. So that, I think that'd be a good start, having it at a government level, a sort of focus on the importance of kind of picking up this different way that men are coping and that need support. I think there's also issues in picking up depression in men in the first place. So men often exhibit different types of behaviours or sort of express depression or low mood in a very different way to women. And lots of the ways that we traditionally have of picking up depression is sensitive to how women express depression. So there is a scale for male depression, and it's much more accurate at identifying depression. But of course, the usual ways of recognising it, things like low mood being expressed, men are much more likely to exhibit anger or sort of self-sabotaging behaviours, or so even things like extramarital affairs can be a way of recognising male depression, but it's not necessarily behaviours that exhibit sympathy or kind of exhibit or that people would immediately pick up on as a cry for help. Or so I think there's a lot of issues in the way we, either as society and also health professionals, recognise depression. And then the other point that I was going to make is one of my student projects looked at university students and how they want to talk about their mental health. And they've all said that they want other men to ask about their mental health, because there's almost a sort of validation in, as women, we can't bestow masculinity in the way that another man can. So if another man asks about their mental health, then it's still manly for me to talk about my mental health. So I think there's a role, particularly for young men, in having male mentors or older men, male mentors, or other men in society sort of saying, it's fine to talk.
Yeah, 100%. And just to add to that as well, I think touching on your last point of another guy facilitating that conversation, as you say, asking the question, that oftentimes goes a lot further than just kind of like tiptoeing around it and trying to read emotions. If you're just kind of quite candid with it and you just straight up ask, I think that's a really good way to open that discussion and start to kind of tackle the problem and try and help them essentially as well.
Thank you. Thanks, guys. It's really interesting. I've only just signed up to Instagram for a year ago. I'm a little bit behind the curve, but I've been dumbfounded by the amount of men on there during this month, where it is obviously a focus on men's mental health. The amount of men on there my age and also younger men actually talking about their mental health, but also famous men as well, pop stars, etc., talking about their mental health struggles. And I've been able to identify with that and feel less embarrassed about talking about those issues. And I think if we look back 10 years ago, we've definitely moved on as a society, and it's talked about a lot more. And I was talking to one of my friends recently, and he's a builder. He works on a building site, and the building contractor is actually doing a lot for mental health this month for men to talk about it. And that's very much an area where you wouldn't normally see men talking about their mental health.
I think I support that. The more people talk about it, and the more people experience it being talked about, it sort of breaks that taboo, doesn't it? So, things like this, the more and more people experience it, they'll feel safer, perhaps, to be able to, start that conversation.
But even, Richard, I even think, my daughter's a little bit older now, but, we always talked about physical education at school, but I'm not sure how much our children get talked about mental health education, and young boys talking about their mental health, and it being okay to discuss it with their peers. So just moving on, because we're going to have to move on to our next section shortly. So what one piece of advice would you give to men who are struggling with their health or mental health issues? What? Only one.
I'll go first. I'll just get talk. It is fine. Find somebody, anybody, whether it's via a helpline or anything else, start the conversation.
Yeah, 100%. Start the conversation and know that there's no shame in asking for help as well. I think that's super important and kind of gets lost in the whole discussion about mental health as well, is that everyone experiences it, whether it's seen or not, whether you're presenting as having some mental health problems or not. I think it's important to remember that you're not the only one, and people are definitely going to be able to relate to you, and they'll think that you've got a great amount of strength as well to be able to actually come forward and say, I need some help here, and I'm actively looking to kind of make a change and better my situation.
Probably echoing what the other two have said. I'm trying not to just repeat. So for something different, I'd say look for, find what's your hobby. Go and look for a shared group, something where men are doing things together, whether that's a shared sport, a men's shed near you, or there's even men's pie club where men will go and make pies together. There's also, find your hobby and go and find that shoulder to shoulder support if you haven't got somebody close to you to talk to. You don't have to go to talk, but go and find a shared space, and talking will probably happen while you're there.
Thank you, Caroline. I'm just looking at some of the comments that we're getting in. People are saying that it's all about talking, and someone's put in, it's brave to ask for help, and it is a courageous thing to ask for help, isn't it? And it's when you don't ask for help that you tend to get yourself in trouble, and deeper depths of despair. So in the second half of this talk, we're going to move on to more RA and JA specific questions. So I'm going to open up with this one. Does your RA impact? Let me start again. Does your RA or JA impact your self-esteem or self-confidence?
I think it definitely has done in the past, 100%. But the more that I've matured and the older that I've got, the more that I've been able to own it. But I don't think that's just maturing and development. I think that's also a combination of being on some great medications, which has put me into remission for the last few years, and exercise as well has really allowed me to develop my sense of self and feel like a lot more of a kind of valid person at times, because previously I felt like I was kind of going missing in the whole equation of like my social life or everyone else's social life. And it just felt like the world was kind of moving forwards without me and I was being left behind. So I think, during those times, it's super hard to stay strong. But I think it's definitely a thing that it massively impacts your self-esteem. But just know that it will get better, and it can get better. And there's always people and organizations that you can rely on for that help. But your time will definitely come. And yeah, coming from a place where I suffered with depression and anxiety before, to be able to say now that I'm kind of the strongest that I've been physically and mentally is a privilege. And it's definitely possible, provided that you're on great medications and you're doing the right things and engaging with these groups as well, and exploring your hobbies and passions and just really trying to develop as a person, I think. But oftentimes that comes naturally as well. It's not something that should be a chore or something that should necessarily be sought out. I think you'll find your path, and you'll definitely get there eventually in terms of feeling established in yourself and your self-esteem.
Sorry, I sort of, my experience has been a little bit of probably adjusting, and not, so self-esteem can go down. So yeah, I used to be able to do a lot more exercise. The rheumatologist wasn't helpful when he just said you're getting old. But from a point of view of just adjusting, that you can't necessarily do everything you used to be able to do, but you can still do a lot of stuff. And I remember years ago listening to a guy who was a coach. He was being coached for Paralympic swimming. He used to be able to be he was aiming for the main Olympics, and a coach, I think it was a Russian coach, said to him, look, you might have been able to do 5,000 things, you now can only do 3. It's up to you whether you spend your time thinking about the 2,000 things you can't do. And I always think about that. I can't do what I used to be able to do, but I can still do stuff, and I can, might have to do it a little bit slower, might have to pace myself a bit more, but I still look at it, I'm in a damn sight better position than I could have been with something else. So yeah, I can't do what I used to do. But it's thinking that, it's just that balance of probably resetting a little bit and changing expectations.
Thanks. So obviously there's going to be men out there who've probably just been recently diagnosed with an inflammatory arthritis. And even if they can tell their partners and their male friends and all of that, what sort of tips and hints do you have for them to be able to explain it to their children, who could be, who will be obviously quite a bit younger? How can they make something quite complex, simple to understand, and without potentially scaring them?
I'm not quite sure how to answer that. Isaac, you might have a go, but no. I think it's probably just keeping the message, still being truthful about actually, in my case, RA is about, my immune system has taken a dislike to my joints, and therefore every so often it goes on and attacks them, but they have medication to try and deal with that. And because it's a bit like having flu at times, it can make you feel tired. So I think it's, not overstating it, but then go, Isaac, you're saying the medication and other bits are there to help us, feel better. But yeah, there'll be times when it's harder, and just being honest that, if there are periods when that's happening, just be honest that, I sometimes go, well, I've just got to go to bed, I'm too tired. The family accept that I'm probably the first to bed now, but that's the way I have to cope with it, and you deal with it.
Yeah, and like you said, being honest and straightforward about it.
Yeah,
I think sometimes it can almost be harder for the dads than for the children, because I think children are quite resilient, and if they want to spend time with dad, so whatever you're doing, the children will want to do something with you, whereas I think there's often for men an assumption that dads have a particular role to play in playing with children. dads do the physical play, the throwing them around, and that's a lot of my interviews with men with rheumatic diseases have said, I'm not a real dad, or that sort of, I can't do and the same granddads again also have a similar expectation of doing the rough and tumble play, and but I think children are just as they just want your attention and your time, and so there's probably a lot around just reframing how you spend time with them, and there's probably more to do in supporting the men than the children in rebalancing that relationship, I think.
Yep. Isaac, did you want to come in on that? How would you have explained it to your younger self?
Yeah, so I guess as Richard said, just not overcomplicating it, just being direct and straight up, saying, you know, I am prone to having flares. I'm prone to not feeling quite myself, and that might present as being a little bit grumpy or a bit tired or a bit frustrated. And I don't have children, so I'm not exactly sure how I would explain it to them. But I guess the way that I could see it is how my partner understands it. And what I've said to her is just that, you know, it's very changeable and there are going to be fluctuations, but it doesn't change who I am at my core. And I really value the support that's provided. And I appreciate that it can be super hard for them at times as well to see someone struggling and to, you know, not be able to get out of bed all day or not be able to walk around the flat as normal or even go outside. But it's also important to remember that it will change and it can get better. And, you know, for me, it has always got better from that point of a really bad flare. So, yeah, I think just emphasizing gratitude for the support and trying to, you know, present in a way that they can understand that's not, you know, all the technicalities that comes with arthritis and all the little nuances. Just keep it fairly simple and it'll make sense, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
Isaac, I've got a question. You just mentioned your partner there, and obviously you're a little bit younger than me, only by a couple of years, but I'm presuming, you know, I know you had JA before you met your partner. So how did that conversation go?
Yeah, so at the time when I met her, I was in remission completely. And then I had a flare up of my knee, I think maybe 5 or 6 months in. But she's super caring and really understanding. So it wasn't really a thing, to be honest. She was just really kind of empathetic for the way that I was feeling and wanted to support me in any way possible. So I think I was really lucky in that sense. But yeah, it wasn't really a big deal. I had times where, you know, as I said, I couldn't get out of bed. I couldn't walk around the flat. I couldn't go outside, do date nights, that kind of stuff. So it was really hard, but I think it also coincided with lockdown. So there wasn't that pressure to be able to do all the normal things necessarily. So I was quite lucky in that sense. But there have been times as well with my previous partners where it's been super tricky. But yeah, there's just been that understanding that, you know, I will come out the other side of it and things will get better. But yeah, kudos to my partner for sticking by me and being a very supportive soul, bless her.
Thank you. And Caroline, I was just going to ask on the back of Isaac's answer, do you have any sort of evidence where, you know, men struggle to talk to their partners about RA and their long-term conditions, etc.?
So in general, I think men tend to say that their wives or their partners are their kind of biggest source of support. So I think they are, you know, if they can't talk to their friends, it's often, and some particularly older men will say, I talk to my wife and I talk to the doctor, and that's it. But I think, so I certainly also had men, and again, probably more the younger men, but it might just be that it came out more in their narratives, but that they were holding back a certain amount from their partners. So there would be a point where they didn't want to kind of offload all of the, they wanted to protect them. So they didn't show them the sort of worst of their condition. Or so I think that's where we want to be really cautious that we are picking up the gaps there. So if men's wives and partners are their main source of support, but they want to protect them from the sort of worst of their condition, then it's really important that in clinical care we're picking up the difference. But in general, that was sort of the general message was, you know, coping alongside wives and partners and them being really important. But yes, there was a evidence of sort of almost masking the full impact to try and protect them a bit, but that didn't come through with everyone.
And I think some of the other routes of support, you know, I'm going to do a plug for NRAS here, but there's a back to exercise group that Katie and Ian sort of started around. But even when there are sessions when you just got men all suffering, and we had, you know, not Olympic, Team Sky cyclist Ian Stannard came on and talked about how he got diagnosed. And I think part of his issue was when he brought the peloton down because he couldn't bend his wrists and control his bike, he realised there was something going on. But even in the conversation, just talking about, you know, how different people cope with, and you find everybody's affected differently, but just sharing and, you know, maybe picking up a few hints and tips that might help or give you a bit of motivation, I think is really helpful. So, you know, getting involved and just talking to other people who have the condition, I think can sometimes be very helpful.
Thank you. Thanks. So just thinking about your interactions with your healthcare professionals. So how easy is it for you to discuss with, you know, the various people that you come into contact with in the NHS, consultants, nurses, etc., from a man's perspective about any issues that you have with your RA or mental health and associated issues?
I've found it very easy, but I think my experience is not everywhere is the same. So I can dial and I can ring the hospital. There's a helpline to the rheumatology department. They will generally call me back either the afternoon or the following day, as long as I'm not pestering them. But when I was first diagnosed, it was a case of I would have to have the blood tests. You then have to ring them to get a result. They'll go, for everybody else would be worried, but for you it's normal. You know, so that was their sort of response. But you began to learn what sort of things to look out for. And now I get, for example, my blood test results online. So I will look at them myself and I sort of know what, you know, if the ALT is high, then I know, you know, what their advice is going to be. Stop taking the methotrexate for a week, come in for another blood test. So you sort of know, but you can start to pick up, to self-manage those type of things over time. You pick up, but yes, if I have an issue, they're very good and quick, but I know that's not the same for everybody. And it's different, and different healthcare providers will be different.
Yeah, I agree with Richard 100%. My personal healthcare professionals are super amazing. I haven't always had it that way, though. When I was living back in Cornwall, when I was younger, when I was first diagnosed before I moved to London, I don't know whether it was because it was a good few years ago or because there was less prevalence of JIA in Cornwall at the time, but things were a lot slower. There was less understanding. Being progressed down sort of the medication pathways was a lot slower. But now living in Greenwich, I've got some really amazing healthcare professionals. My rheumatology nurse especially is amazing. So I can drop them an email and they'll call me back the same day. Or as Richard said as well, I can call the helpline with any issues and yeah, same day response. So yeah, really lucky in that sense. And I think, yeah, the NHS, the hospital over in Lewisham is doing a great job actually. But yeah, as Richard said as well, it's not like that for everyone throughout the UK, but I think, yeah, the more, in a sense, if you do have to pester them, then it's not always a bad thing as well, because ultimately you are suffering, you are in need, and sometimes they do need that push to kind of get you further down the line and escalate things more quickly. But yeah, obviously the NHS is under a massive strain as well, so it's not always as simple as that. But yeah, in general, it's been a pretty good experience for me, dealing with my nurses and consultants.
Yeah, and I think I can understand the frustration when, if it, you know, probably it sounds like both of us are at the remission end of the spectrum, but when you're not, and trying to get either an upgrade in medication or going on to more expensive, when actually probably the evidence is that's going to help, that probably can be quite frustrating and quite a challenge at times to get, you know, upgraded, as it were, on the medication front.
Yeah, 100%. I think I appreciate that they have to explore certain options to a degree, but sometimes it can be done a lot quicker. So I think the pathways are a lot more direct these days. I met someone at an event the other day who was diagnosed, I think 2.5 years ago, and she's already on biologics. Whereas for me, I think they were just coming out at the time. So I got on my first one when I was 16. So what was that now? 11 years ago. And it was still a relatively new thing. But by that time, my wrist had already fused. I was still massively flaring. And that was the only thing that really got it under control for the first time since my diagnosis. So yeah, I do think they've kind of like matched the progression in medication development with the pathway escalation in terms of getting you on the right meds quicker, essentially.
Thank you. Over to you, Stuart.
So, I'm curious, what's been the hardest thing that you've found yourself having to cope with regard to your condition, like either recently or right back at the beginning?
Fatigue is the biggest thing for me. I'm probably okay once I get past the first half hour in the morning where my feet start not to hurt. So I wake up most mornings with painful feet, but generally, most of the time I don't have the same level of flares, etc. But tiredness and fatigue, and it might be partly from the methotrexate. It could be from, the immune system. So that's my biggest frustration. And at times you have to pace yourself and recognise I can't quite, or if I'm on a day out, challenging, by the time you get to the evening, I might be, in a position where I've had enough. And that can sometimes be frustrating. Or not falling asleep in the cinema, those sort of things.
Yeah, I think my biggest challenge with RA is definitely when I was younger. So just missing out on the core time of embedding yourself in a friendship group and making connections and discovering who you are. So I had like 50% attendance at school during secondary school, and then college was marginally better. So yeah, it was really hard kind of coming in 1 week and then having a flare and then being off for 2 weeks, and my mates being like, oh, where's Isaac? Oh, he's off again. Like, people not really understanding it as well. That was definitely a big challenge. They just couldn't get to grips with the changeable nature of the condition. So sometimes it was easier just to say, oh, I had food poisoning or I was sick, instead of like, I'm battling this massive amount of swelling and this pain and not being able to walk. So yeah, I think that was kind of the two things. It was the lack of mobility and being able to kind of get to A to B, and also just missing the core kind of years of growing up, basically. Sounds sad, but that's the truth of it. But yeah, coming out the other side of it, obviously all is well and good now, but at the time it was really bloody hard. And definitely suffered with quite bad depression at times as well, just feeling so out of the loop with my friends, as I said, kind of moving on and doing their own thing and finding their feet in life. So yeah, super tricky, but all is well now.
And Caroline, obviously, with all the people that you interact with, is there a common theme? Is it very similar to what Isaac and Richard have said?
Definitely very similar, yes. I suppose the only other thing, or a couple of things maybe, but one of the key things I'd add on top would be impact on work, which again, it doesn't come up with everyone. Some people have really understanding workplaces, and but that was one of the sort of really noticeable things that people struggled with, was particularly in physical jobs, either losing their job or having to find a different job, or having to get colleagues to do parts of the job they couldn't do anymore, which is obviously difficult in a very kind of physical work environment. So that's probably the other thing I'd add into there. But yeah, definitely recognise everything that both Richard and Isaac are saying from other men's narratives.
And that's kind of a perfect segue, Caroline. Thank you. Into the next question.
Completely unrehearsed.
How has it been having, what sort of impact has arthritis had on your work life, Isaac and Richard?
So yeah, it's been super formative in mine, I'd say. Obviously starting my own business centered around exercise with arthritis. That was a passion of mine. I went to uni and I did my degree in psychology, but after the 3 years, I knew it wasn't quite the area that I wanted to go into. My real passion was health and fitness. And yeah, it was a bit of a vision that I could help other people like myself. Sort of everyone's welcome, but 18 to 35-year-olds is kind of my specialism. They're kind of the demographic that I relate to the most. I'm sure likewise with them to me. So yeah, in a sense, like the way that I've structured my business now is that it's all an online format. So I don't do any in-person sessions. It's all delivered via an app. So The main reason behind that is because, one, it's super effective, but also because if I have a flare up, I don't have the pressure of having to call off sessions and let people down. I can still manage to do my work from home, and I work another job as well alongside this, which is also home based. So I'm fully remote, and my my boss at that job has an understanding of my condition, and yeah, I've managed to kind of craft a situation where I'm fully remote, so that if I do have a flare up, I can still get an income and it's not impacted by my condition, basically.
I think I'm reasonably lucky as well from a perspective, and I agree with Caroline's comments about, you know, if it's more manual labour, I've got the ability, and I think especially post COVID, far more sort of Teams meetings and other bits gives me the opportunity not always to have to drive. So I would be driving 2 hours a day before COVID, or 2.5, depending on what the A14 was like. But it's now, you know, more flexible. So probably being able to pace a little bit better and not spending the time driving does help. And so I'm probably, you know, one of the ones where it's probably not affected work too much, but I do appreciate it. And I've talked to people at work who, you know, are affected because the times of days that they can work, there needs to be a little bit more flexibility, or, you know, if they need to go for appointments, they've got to be able to cancel some of the work commitments that they might have. So, you know, those type of challenges different people face.
Richie, can I just ask, when you were diagnosed, how easy was it for you to actually approach your employer? Did you worry about that conversation?
No, I spoke to the boss and said, I've been diagnosed with this. I'm going on a whole load of steroids, which apparently might make me a lot grumpier. And the piece of work I was working on, he went, well, that'll be a good thing then. I need you to be grumpy. So from a perspective, yeah, it wasn't a problem. But I think because I caught it very early, there wasn't a lot of damage, and the steroid stroke methotrexate, as they blended in, got it under control. So I sympathise with Isaac. I didn't have the level of flares. You know, for me, it was about hobbling down the stairs, sometimes a little bit in the hands and things, but not anything to the scale that some people get. So mine was controlled quickly and has stayed under control generally. Over the 8 years, I get the odd flare, and I have to put my hands in a splint every so often to try and stop, you know. But yes, so from a point of view of work, probably if I didn't talk about it, might not know.
Thank you. It's interesting. I was at one of our volunteer groups the other day, and one of the men were talking there about applying for jobs and how worried they were about applying for jobs, and, you know, saying that actually they have to disclose that they've got RA, JIA, and whether they were excluded from getting through to interview stage, or once they'd actually got the job, having to disclose that to an employer. Caroline, is there any evidence sort of around men worrying about that situation?
I mean, there's definitely evidence of them worrying. I don't have the answer of what the right. Some men, like Richard's just said, you know, told their employer, and it was a much better decision for them to tell them to get the support around that. There's some men that said because of the nature of the job, they have to be honest because of insurance purposes. And certainly men in the States were very sort of aware of the need to be on top of things for insurance. Other men have had more negative experiences disclosing to employers, so particularly jobs where they could just be let go, often found that they were. I would hope that you would see that less now. This was often older men that had been diagnosed a little while ago. So, but sort of, you know, people that might be in 0 hours contract type jobs had more negative experiences. I think in general, we're moving towards, you know, in general as a society, we're moving towards more kind of inclusive of disability being treated seriously. So I think, you know, we are moving towards a position where disclosing shouldn't be harming kind of job opportunities, or and obviously by disclosing, you can make sure that you are able to say, no, I can't do that particular task, and have accommodations. And but I completely understand the fear, and I think in some cases that fear probably is borne out. Unfortunately, I think we're still not quite there yet as a society, I don't think, in people fully understanding or being fully as inclusive as perhaps they should be. But yeah, in general, and I think the other thing is people would often just tell the minimal people that they had to, so they'd tell their boss and then not tell their colleagues, and I guess that's maybe a kind of happy medium. But sometimes letting colleagues know what's going on can be helpful as well. So I don't have a good answer, I'm afraid. But mixed reviews, I think, on disclosing to employees.
Well, I think sometimes when you tell colleagues, you might not get the answer you want. One of them said to me, "Oh, you can get a blue badge then, can't you?" Oh, well, that's the last thing I want to happen. So, so people think they're being helpful and they're not.
Absolutely.
I think final question from me. So, when you've been speaking to like your male friends, Isaac, with your your group, your support group from back in the day, which is to now, and Richard with your friends, when you've been having those conversations, have they then revealed to you about their struggles with either mental health or physical health? So it's been a two-way thing.
Yeah, 100%, definitely. So I feel like it opens up that discourse in general, and it's definitely reciprocated. I'd say 99% of the time. If you show that little bit of vulnerability and that little bit of openness, then they're going to trust you to be able to say how they're feeling. And obviously, it's more of a snowball effect from there, and it builds this super healthy, open kind of relationship where you can talk about things and not feel embarrassed or feel like you have to keep it to yourself or speak to someone else about it. So yeah, there's definitely a reciprocal nature in the conversation, 100%. And yeah, it's something that still happens to this day as well. So bit off piece, but I have a barge holiday that I go on with the boys every year. So we get a canal boat, and there's 6 or 7 of us, all friends from back from Cornwall. And we go there, obviously have a few beers, have a good time, but we also just like massively debrief on life in general, and just really speak on a level about our own individual struggles and how we're feeling. And yeah, it's just a really nice kind of time to reconnect, because we don't get to see each other much throughout the year, but when we do have that time, it's just really nice to be able to confide in each other and just basically get everything off our chest. So yeah, it's super lovely.
Yeah, and I use the example of the cycling. I've been surprised how many people actually do have something, that whether it's diabetes or Crohn's or all sorts of different bits, that there's people who just get on with life and actually are in one way or another dealing with something. And I think it's more prevalent than we think, and the more we talk about it, the more we realize that we've got one type of thing, and yes, it's can be painful at times, but they're people with back pain, they're people with all sorts of different things that actually just talking about it and sharing it, you realize that you're not alone, and there's a lot of people with different types of things that everybody's battling away with.
Thank you guys. So we've literally got 5 minutes left, but I've got about another 50 questions to ask. So unfortunately, it looks like we're going to have to come back and do another session. But what I'd like to say is just thank you very much to Caroline, to Isaac and Richard for coming along tonight and talking about quite a tricky topic, especially for men to discuss. And hopefully, for myself, I've learned a lot, and those people watching tonight have learned a lot. So just as a reminder, if you are struggling, there is lots of help out there, and we've seen some examples tonight. If you are struggling with your RA or your JA, or someone that's struggling out there, they can contact our helpline, and you'll see up on the screen now the telephone number there for you. And it's open Monday to Friday from 9:30 to 4:30. When we're talking about relationships as well, we are actually pulling together a Relationship Matters booklet, and we are looking for quotes, comments, stories from men about their relationships. Strangely enough, we've got quite a few from women, but we're struggling to get those ones from men, which are really important. So if you want to share your stories, and we can share them anonymously in the booklet, please just send your stories to inquiries@nras.org.uk. Yeah, over to Stuart.
Okay, just a couple of announcements from me. So I hadn't heard of the NHS Health Check, but that's a free check-up of your overall health, and is available for people who are aged 40 to 74 who don't have a number of the pre-existing conditions such as heart disease, diabetes, etc. You can see the full list on the NHS website. You should be invited to an NHS health check by your GP or local council every 5 years. But if you think you are eligible and haven't been contacted, reach out to your GP surgery. For more information, search for NHS Health Check online. On a different note, it's coming up to Christmas, so please do take a look at this year's wonderful collection of Christmas cards and gifts, including the ever-popular Pass the Parcel game and an e-card that was designed by one of our lovely supporters. So it's charitycardshop, all one word, .com/NRAS. So for everyone who watched live, thank you very much. For everyone who watched live to the very end, you get a special thank you. For everyone watching up on catch up, where were you? We did miss you. That's all from Tim and myself and our panel. Have a nice evening, and we'll see you in the next one.